Will absolute power kick off a new era for Jon Kent? I certainly hope so. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues Weekly, where I talk about DC Comics 1 week after their release on the Ultra tier of the DC Universe Infinite subscription service. In each installment, I pick an assortment of comics to talk about as a DC fan and also explore what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, full spoilers for everything I talk about. This is your first and only warning. Many spoilers lie ahead. Right now, we're taking a look at comics originally released to the Ultra tier on September 4th. In one case, Plastic Man, Black Label #1, actually was also released to publishing like comic book stands, I believe, on September 4th. But the rest of them originally published August 7th. Anyway, so first off, just brief thoughts on Plastic Man No More #1, a Black Label comic. It was interesting to see this attempted, I don't want to say reboot because it's Black Label, and so that means it's not necessarily part of DC continuity. It's really a non-committal line that I believe it was Jeff Johns kind of said, we just kind of see how readers respond and then determine at some point after that if it's how close it is to or how much it's part of the regular continuity. So I don't have any reason to think this is going to be an actual reboot. We'll see. But coming so soon after the attempted reboot, I thought, of the Gail Simone Plastic Man series, which I was very interested in. This is strange to see this happening so soon. And it does take things to I don't know, maybe a heavier place than I would expect for Plastic Man, and I normally like stuff that is going heavier, and I actually do like that about this story, but it does a weird thing with the Justice League in this story where they are all kind of laughing at Plastic Man and treating his suffering as of no consequence. Like everything that comes out of Plastic Man's mouth is a joke and not to be taken seriously. And he's like, no, guys, I'm really hurt here. And they're like, you're such a cut up, Plastic Man, And the art changes to a very simplistic vibe. And I'm like, what's going on symbolically here? Is this Plastic Man's perception, his perspective of the Justice League, or is this actually what we're supposed to think the Justice League is like, in which case they are very uncaring and cold. So it's kind of a weird thing. I'm not sure what's going on, and it's just, I don't like the Justice League characters being portrayed that way without a clear explanation as to why. So anyway, I'll probably skim the next issue of Plastic Man No More, but it's just got enough weirdness going on that I'm not sure what to think of it or how invested I should bother being with it. Then we've got Batman #151, an Absolute Power tie-in, where Batman and Catwoman are trying to get their hands on a mother box that Amanda Waller has that's giving her just huge leverage in the big crossover event. So it's kind of a heist mission they're going on. And it's cool. I like seeing these two together. I kind of like the idea of them being a doomed couple, but in a slightly different sense, where, we've seen how they almost got married and how that didn't work out, but there still is this love that they have for each other, even though there's a recognition that, like, this is never going to work out between us. And I think that's probably the closest we can expect Batman to come to having, an actual stable relationship. I think that I actually don't want him to get married. I like him as a tragic character that never really finds that kind of true familial happiness, or if so, he can't manage to hang on to it. So it's not that I want them to get married, but at the same time, I'm like, but I do want him to have the happiness of a love in his life, and so this is maybe the way to kind of have our cake and eat it too, or not have our cake and not eat it, or I don't know what the metaphor is. So I like seeing them teamed up. I didn't like Bizarro in this issue. He plays a significant role, and it's very rare. I can't remember a single Bizarro story I've genuinely liked. And a lot of it has to do with the way his dialogue is written and how his backwards talk, his backwards logic is really inconsistent. But a big tip of my hat to, I believe it's Chip Zdarsky is the name of the writer here, who actually calls that out. When I think the only times I've been able to stomach Bizarro or enjoy him to some limited degree is when he's just written like a silent Frankenstein's monster. The more he talks, the more I find him frustrating, because the logic of how his grammar works, his backwards logic works, is not handled with consistency from one writer to the next. And so the more he opens his mouth, the more I, as a reader, am tasked with trying to decipher, decode what it is he is actually meaning to say. And I just find that a tiresome exercise for something that ultimately makes him seem a little bit silly, and they have to work hard against that to make him not seem silly to me. So, but this little bit here where Zdarsky says in Batman's inner monologue, I have to use his sporadic backward logic, and just the addition of the word sporadic there, I'm like, thank you for acknowledging that it is sporadic, that there is a great inconsistency with how this character is written. And at least then, okay, it suggests that there is some kind of internal lore logic about Bizarro, that even his backwards talk, it's acknowledged in this world, is inconsistent, and that's just, maybe one more thing about him that's weird and messed up in his head. Anyway, the main event for me this week was Absolute Power #2, continuing the main story of this big crossover event. And the heroes that are on the run have gathered in the Fortress of Solitude. They're trying to come up with a game plan, and it seems like things might be starting to come together when, boom, suddenly Waller's agents, the Brainiac Queen, and Jon Kent, now overtaken by the Brainiac Queen to serve Amanda Waller, they basically burst in on the Fortress of Solitude and just start taking everybody down. It's a great moment because in the second issue, we start feeling like, okay, they're regrouping, they're developing a plan, and then that totally gets stomped on. That is so important to me, I think, this early on, to make us feel like the heroes just cannot win. If I started feeling like they were getting their bearings with issue 2, be like, no, this is Amanda Waller's moment. And I want her to really be the threat that they're kind of proposing that she is in this story. So it's a great moment, and not just for this crossover, but potentially for my appreciation for the character of Jon Kent going forward. There's a point where Jon is fighting his father, Superman, and we see the back of a character's head. I think it's Wonder Woman, but I'm not entirely sure, even looking at the context. But they say, or maybe it's Dreamer, I'm not sure. Anyway, this character says, Jon, don't, there's no coming back from this. You'll never forgive yourself. Now, maybe that's just comic book talk trying to create a dramatic moment here, and he's not going to cross a line that he'll be haunted by for years to come. But I hope that he is. I think the way that this transformation is portrayed for him is, it's very pervasive what's happening with him, how his body's being taken over by Brainiac tech. I mean, when they show a close-up image of his eye, even the white of his eye has been replaced by gray, metallic stuff, and his iris looks just a little bit more precise and geometrically machine-like. And so, it's a very in-depth kind of takeover. And of course, these are comic books. He could get a complete and total biological restoration from this, but the way it's drawn, I'm like, man, I hope the recovery from this physically takes a long time, and maybe even leaves him scarred, not so he looks horrific or whatever, but just in some way there's some traces of this left, and that also emotionally there's something that's done here. The reason for that is I feel like Jon Kent lost the most interesting things about him when he was aged up to be, young adult age from being a child. When he was a child, he, in and of himself, perhaps wasn't the most interesting character. I don't know that I would read many stories that were just about him at that age. What he was at that time was largely a supporting cast member for Superman and Lois. He was a device for creating wonderful types of stories that can only happen when you're talking about parents of a young child. And as soon as they super sped aged him up, they took those kinds of stories away. The only way they can tell them now is in flashbacks, which they are going back to. So clearly somebody at DC thinks there's an audience for those kinds of stories. And it was like J. Michael Straczynski, or I can't remember what kind of, it's kind of a superstar writer that came and wrote a story where that happened. And I wonder if he was just so high profile that they were just like, yeah, sure. And he kind of got his way with editorial making that choice. But I've always, been saddened by that, mostly because of that, because of just the fact of aging him up. And then when you add to that the fact that there's already Connor Kent, who is already a young adult kind of son, since he's made from half of Superman's DNA. They've kind of played with a little bit of a father-son relationship at times between the two of them, or at least an older brother, younger brother type thing. I don't know. So maybe not a true son, but they're still just too similar. They're two young adult Supermans with pretty much the same power set. I mean, they could lean into Connor's tactile telekinesis, and they've been doing that some more, I think, lately. But even so, it's just like, no, what are we doing? And honestly, I think part of that move was to do some demographic box checking in making Jon Kent a gay, or I can't remember, maybe he's bisexual character. But anyway, yeah, I think it's the aging itself that took so much promise out of him, so much potential out of him. So what could restore that? Well, I think a big shift like this could. Something that he is changed by, something that he is haunted by, something that weighs him down with guilt and regret. Of course, going this route, we as readers aren't really going to hold him responsible for what he's done, because we know that he was taken over by something. And so it's not that I actually want him to be responsible and go down this dark path, but I just see for the first time in years some potential for something to be going on with him that actually alters his character, his personality, that does something interesting on that level, instead of him being just a young adult Superman checking a demographic box, So do I think they'll actually go in a direction that will have some remnants left behind that alter the kinds of stories that are told with Jon Kent? I don't know, but I'm hopeful. And that's why I've chosen this week the blue ring representing hope, because man, I'm really hoping that this could be the beginning of something. I think it's 50-50 whether or not it actually is. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. But I suppose those are all of my thoughts on comic books for now. As always, I love getting your thoughts in the comments below. What's got your attention about these stories that I've mentioned, or maybe something else from DC recently? You can let me know down in the comments. Then I also hope you'll check out christiangeekcentral.com. We've got tons of content there. We've got our podcast as well. All of that created for you to enjoy as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.